I was visiting my mom. She turned 80, and it was a cool experience for me. So I was thinking about you on Thursday night, but also happy to have Martin and all of you enjoying the presence of God without me. Well, we have 6 weeks before we jump into summer, and so one of the things that I wanted to do was keep Easter alive, because it's so easy for it to come and go. And so I'd like to take a look at Doubting Thomas. Man, I've heard 100 sermons on Doubting Thomas. 101 now, okay? Now, Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." A week later, the disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, and Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And then said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand, put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Well, as I mentioned, Easter. We're 3 weeks removed from it. And for me, I get a real spiritual surge that happens to me, and it feels like I've changed, I've transitioned, I've deepened, and it lasts for a little while. And now we're 3 weeks removed from the major event, and if you don't fan the flames of the resurrection, it goes out. And I want you to hear me. There is a power available to you that can transform your life above the sinful self that gets in the way. It can enable you to seriously experience God's presence, His guidance, His protection, His miraculous touch. You have to understand that Jesus is the central figure in all of history. Okay, his crucifixion and resurrection are the main events of all time. Sin came in, destroyed the world. God fixed sin through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. You know, creation was an act of God's power and wisdom. Salvation, okay, this is an act of God's love and mercy. It's even more incredible. And Easter loses its meaning, usually, when life comes tumbling in upon us. You know, and it's easy to lose our faith in today's society. I mean, we're constantly provided with reasons to doubt. Just the other day, I'm talking to a pastor, and he confesses to me, you know, the ongoing sin that seems to reign in this world causes me to doubt. And a lot of people feel that way. And you have to understand that free will, that's the problem. If there's no free will, then every bad thought, everything you do is going to be controlled. That's not the way God set up His world. He set it up so that you can choose Him, and when you choose wrong, you get forgiveness and a fresh start. There's a reality of fluidity to our relationship with God. In our text, all the disciples, they're hiding in fear. They've heard of the resurrection. Mary Magdalene said, "I've seen the Lord." They went to the empty tomb. They saw the folded up grave clothes. They had an intellectual knowledge of the resurrection, but they didn't believe until they had a personal encounter with the living Christ. You know, I was reading about Murphy's Law. You know Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Well, there's an addition to Murphy's Law. One of them is when you go to court, remember, you're putting your hands in the lives of 12 people who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. Okay? And I bring it up because the disciples, okay? Jesus told them, I'm going to be crucified. He laid out the events over and over and again. They didn't believe it. We were talking on Sunday about the Great Commission, and it says that some worshiped and some doubted. He's standing before them, and they're still struggling with this whole concept of that he died and rose again. And this leads us to doubting Thomas. I'm going to ask, how would you like to be remembered? You know, what's that commercial? What do you want on your tombstone? You know, would you like to be known as a benevolent person, a talented person, a person of integrity? How would you like to be defined by your worst moment, like Thomas the doubter? Okay. I think after Judas, you know, no one's been subject to more criticism and unkind judgment than Thomas, all because he demanded proof that Jesus was alive. And you can't blame him. He probably stood at a distance and saw his Lord hanging on a cross, dead. And that's just something that sort of seals the deal. And from that point, Thomas is in a downward spiral. Think about this. He deserted Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The desertion led to a delay in connecting with the disciples. I don't know why he wasn't with the disciples the first time Jesus showed up, but he's not there. And he misses an opportunity to see Jesus. Well, this led to him denying that he believed in God and making a demand, I've got to see proof. And the backstory of Thomas, you know, unless I see the hole in his hands and the nail prints, I won't believe. He was obviously from Missouri, the show-me state, right? And I want to clarify something. Thomas is doubting, but doubting is not the opposite of faith. Okay? Unbelief is the opposite of faith. Doubt is part of the process of the human mind. We encounter something that's off-putting, we struggle with it. And let's be honest, the resurrection, it's not a common event. Nobody ever comes back from the dead. As I mentioned, this is the most remarkable event in history. It's either the most amazing event in the existence of humanity, or it's the biggest hoax ever perpetrated. I think it's easy to see that it's real just by the way Christians can receive the Spirit of Christ and go from being sour folks to being people full of grace and love. When you and I allow Jesus to take over our personalities and rearrange our schedules and our calendars and our bank accounts and the way we do relationships, well, you can see the reality that Jesus is alive and well and still changing lives. And remember, Thomas is somebody who was there when Jesus raised the widow's son from the dead. Thomas was there when the synagogue leader's daughter was raised from the dead. Thomas was there when Lazarus was raised from the dead. Okay? But he's probably thinking, if Jesus is dead, who's going to raise him? He forgot that I and the Father are one. It's kind of a bummer how we'll forget important things. My wife's always pointing out things that I've forgotten. And again, Thomas has had reason to believe. He's watched Jesus do the miraculous many times. But most of all, he's heard from the mouth of Jesus, I'm going to die on the cross, be dead 3 days, and rise again. He said it numerous times. He should have listened. He should have figured it out. And so there he is in that place of doubt. Not unbelief, but doubt. And friends, I want you to hear me. Christianity is all about you and I choosing to believe what Jesus said. Comes a moment when, do I believe it or not? Because if I do, then I'm going to arrange my life around what Jesus said. And the magic of our faith, it happens when you decide to trust him and step into his direction. That's when the faith flows. If you hold back, the power of his resurrection doesn't really come forward because you're not stepping out in faith. You have to step out and then he shows up. I mean, the Lord gives us enough faith, and He knows some of us are hard-headed, stubborn. He works with us. There's no, set pattern. He knows our personalities are unique, and He speaks to each one of us in different ways. But as we travel down through life's road, there comes a moment when you stop in front of the fork in the road. And this is the time when doubt shows up. Something goes wrong in our life. A prayer request isn't answered. A betrayal occurs. Cancer touches our lives, our families. And the road, the fork in the road, it could lead to skepticism. And how you handle that moment of doubt can result in unbelief or a deeper faith. But it's that crucial moment, usually when you're hurting and in pain, that it happens. And the existence of God. Somebody said to me a little while back, if you talk about God, preacher, I don't see Him. And it's kind of frustrating because I experience Him all the time. But you're right, like the Russian cosmonaut that went up and said, I went into the heavens and I didn't see God. Okay. Well, of course you wouldn't. You were merely in the backyard. People want proof. And there's all kinds of arguments, and we're not going to go into it too much. There's the natural theology argument that you see God in nature. I was just in Portland, Oregon, and you see Mount Hood. Wow. See Mount St. Helens. Wow. You drive up the road a little bit, Mount Rainier. I mean, it's just powerful. You stand at the Grand Canyon, and there's just something about nature that makes you go, this is big. This is too big. And right now our schools are teaching that we evolved from monkeys who came from a lower life form that all came from a single-celled entity. But I think the complexity of life, it just doesn't allow for that. The complexity of the soul and the mind and morality that's inherent within us, that's just something that is the Spirit of God in us. And even think about the human respiratory system. Okay, you got the carbon monoxide, the carbon dioxide, the oxygen. We need blood to circulate. If this isn't connected within a 5-minute period of time, what happens? We don't live. So it couldn't have evolved. My argument. People beat up on the Bible. Somebody was arguing against the Bible to me in Portland. And I did point out that, archaeology has shown that they didn't believe there was ever a Hittite, so they found the Hittite civilization. We didn't believe there was this king from Assyria. They found stones with his name on it. Archaeology just keeps confirming what the Bible says. There's actually no evidence that there was a King David. We found King David stuff. Okay? And here's the bummer. You and I can say, wow, I guess it's true. Or usually what happens is the doubter says, let me move on to a new doubt. And so you never get to enjoy the relationship with God that He wants you to have. But doubt's a personal thing. It's when you struggle that God actually cares about you. I'm thinking about in Numbers 13 when God sends out the 12 spies. Go look at the land that I got, the promised land that I have for you. And the 12 spies go out and they come back. They've got clusters of grapes that they're carrying on a pole. And they come and go, wow, that land surely is nice. But we have a problem. You see, really large people live there. And we'll never be able to take the land. And 2 of the spies are going, well, actually, didn't we just see God part the Red Sea? And has got that big cloud of dust at daytime and the cloud of fire at night. And what about those 10 plagues that you feel like God might be able to pull this off? But the doubters got everybody else to doubt. And so nobody went to the promised land. See, this is why doubt's so important. If you mishandle it, you can live in a spiritual wilderness the rest of your days. Christians, yeah, you probably get saved and go to heaven. But you could have had heaven on earth. You could have enjoyed the power and the thrill, the adventure, the miraculous. Walking with God here and now. And I want you to know life has lots of possibilities, lots of open doors. Okay? It really does. But it has trials that need to be overcome. And our trials, this is why people lose their faith. Why would God allow this to happen to me? Well, we live in a sinful world. And remember, his specialty is taking what's broken and wrong and doing something beautiful out of it. He says, in this world you will have tribulations, but I have overcome the world. So you need to expect tribulations. And for the Israelites, it's not the giants. They don't believe in the God's ability. They don't trust his heart. And do you remember the quote I said on Sunday? Faith does not operate in the realm of the possible. There's no glory for God in that which is humanly possible. Faith begins where man's power ends. Now I want you to think about that something that's before you that you wish could happen, but you can't make it happen. It sounds to me like there's a God opportunity. Because when we can't do it and we say, Lord, I can't do it, and you belong to him, you're his daughter, his son, he loves you, he cares about you, he sent his son to die for you, he put his Holy Spirit in you, he's got a plan for your life. That guy is ready to mobilize for you. It says it all throughout the Bible. And you know how a ship is safest in the harbor, but that's not where ships are supposed to be? You and I were made to walk with an almighty, supernatural God. When we're not doing it, well, then we're not doing what we were made for. And I want you to know, even the best of them can doubt. John the Baptist. Among men, there is nobody greater than John the Baptist. And what does John the Baptist do? Hey, are you the one? Now, here's a guy who baptizes Jesus, hears the voice of God from heaven, sees the dove come down and rest upon Jesus. That guy. And he doubts. Are you the one? Why? Well, he probably had preconceived notions. You know, he's going to have a military Messiah, and Rome is still doing well, and all you're doing is, what are you doing? And so what does Jesus do? He sends him a word from the Scriptures. I'm healing all these people. I'm moving in all these powerful ways. And blessed is everybody who doesn't stumble over me. There's a little message there. Don't miss me. And I wonder how often you and I come with preconceived notions and we miss what God's doing. He brought the problem into our life because he wanted to grow our faith. He wanted to show off his power. He wanted to reach through you to touch somebody else. Yeah, but Lord, it's costing me some pain right now. It's all right, he'll fix it later. What's most important for the Christian is that somebody else is benefited because of our lives and because of our faith. Well, there was an old preacher. He's on a ship, and 100-mile-an-hour winds are blowing. So he starts to pray, God, send us the children of Israel, the children of Moses, the children of the promised land. And another brother interrupts his prayer. Lord, don't send nobody. Come yourself. This ain't no time for children. And I like this because you and I have access to his presence. And friends, that's what Thomas is saying. I want to see my Lord. And I'm not going to settle on you talking about him. I want to have an experience with my Lord. I think this statement of doubt is actually heroic, not something to be ridiculed. I mean, we live in a society, we know people who call the 900 number to find out their future, right? That a singer, Dionne Warwick, right? Maybe it doesn't happen anymore. I remember it's a big deal in L.A., you know. But we got fools. And I feel like saying fools. You know, David Koresh tells everybody he's Jesus come back, and I'd like to have your 12-year-old daughters as sexual partners. Jesus wouldn't ask for that, and you're an idiot to think that he would and to hand your daughter over. We got people willing to take poison so they can get on a ride to Haley's Comet or whatever comet it was, and people will fall for anything today. And as the media spews all this anti-God, anti-Christian rhetoric, if you're not grounded in the Word of God, you're going to fall for it. And what hurts my heart is when a Christian is arguing against the Bible and against the faith, and we're in the middle of the presence of non-believers. I've pulled numerous of them aside and given them a conversation. You know? And they start to roll their doubts with me, and that's a safe place to do it. But Christians shouldn't be rolling their doubts out for other non-believers. We have to get a balance between skepticism and being gullible. The Bereans in Acts, they searched the scriptures to see if these things were so. Well, Thomas has probably had a traumatic experience. This is his Lord. And he's seen him die. And I ran into a friend, and this is what she does. When there's an accident and the husband dies and the wife is still in the car sitting next to him, they call her, the police call her, and she comes and she talks to the woman. The son comes home and finds his mom dead on the floor. They call her and she comes and talks to the son. Because apparently there can be such a traumatic experience that your mind will get stuck in a loop that'll keep you broken for the rest of your life. And so they try to interrupt that loop so that you will have an opportunity to heal from this traumatic event. And Thomas, he's had this kind of event. And sadly, he's withdrawn from the fellowship. And everybody was traumatic. But you know how misery loves company? Been a safe place to be working things out. But he's alone. And alone can be good, and alone can be detrimental. When the disciples say, "We've seen the Lord," Thomas, his skepticism comes out. And it isn't sufficient for him to hear about somebody else. Okay? And he lets his doubt out. The disciples heard it, but you know who else heard it? Somebody who was unseen. The Lord heard his doubts. And I want to remind you that he hears our doubts, those careless words that we woof off. He knows about them. He knows that we're fragile. He knows that we're, frail. He knows that we're going to make mistakes. He knows what's going on in our head and hearts. He knows what's going on inside of you. And this is what I don't like about our passage. Thomas has to wait 7 days. He's got to hang on his doubts for 7 days. Have you ever said the wrong thing and had to sit on it for a week? Reliving it, reworking it in your head, wishing you could take it back, wishing you could correct it, and it's out there and it's been said. We read the Bible stories, and in chapter 19 was followed by chapter 20. Well, actually, there's a week that goes by, and then there's another week that goes by. In Acts, there's chapters where it's 20 years later between chapter 11 and chapter 12. We're just reading the story, not realizing that in life, there's that moment when you have to process, and you have to walk, and you have to apply your faith, and you have to struggle. It's how we handle the in-between times that makes or breaks our faith. And even in relationships, if there's a rift between you and somebody else, time heals all things. Sometimes that's the right answer. Other times, the more time you give it, the further the relationship's going to break. How do you know which one? Ask the Lord to guide you. Take a risk and jump on. Be the one that seeks out reconciliation. Well, they're the one who made the mistake. So what? Don't you think God's covered many of your mistakes? Be the one that steps out. Well, Thomas, he doesn't just sit back and accept what other people says. He steps forward and says, I have to know personally. Remember once, we have confirmation class. And this kid would not say the Apostles' Creed because he wouldn't believe this statement. So I'd explain that statement. Still wouldn't say it. Well, I don't know about that. I had to walk him through, theologically, every single part of that statement before he'd be willing to accept it. And while it was a hassle, it was really kind of brilliant, because he wanted to make sure he understood Christianity before he was going to profess it. And Thomas, he actually knows what he believes. He's not wishy-washy. When Lazarus was raised from the dead, you have to remember that they wanted to kill Jesus. And Jesus said, let's go back to Lazarus. And they said, and all the disciples said, we can't go back there. They want to kill you. Thomas steps forward and says, let's go with them and die. Okay. He's committed to Jesus. He knows who he believes in. But I want to say something powerful here. You can't ignore your doubts, because they're going to come out of nowhere at the worst time, when you need to apply faith. And Satan will roll marbles under your feet, and you didn't work it out, and he magnifies the doubt, because his goal is to separate you from God. So that's why we have to work on the areas we don't believe. Well, see how Jesus handles the doubter. He shows up, and you know, all the pastors say, see how gentle he was. That's not the way I interpret it. He says, peace be with you. Then he looks at Thomas. Come put your hand and your finger in my hand, and stop doubting and start believing. Now, maybe he said it in a kind way. I'm sure he didn't yell at him with disgust. That's not Jesus' style. But did you ever notice on the road to Emmaus, when Jesus is listening to all their doubts, and he goes, you guys who, slow to believe, and he starts, he gives them a little bit of an attitude. You know why? Because Jesus is expecting something from us. And you know what he's expecting? That we're going to believe what he says. Because we miss out. We're going to be having a slow walk to Emmaus, full of doubts, if we don't believe what he says. We're going to miss out on the power of Jesus Christ if we don't believe what he says. Okay? And he's never going to destroy your self-esteem. He loves you. But you know what? He speaks truth to us. He wants us to rise up. And when Thomas sees Jesus, what does he say? Okay, let me see your hand. No. He says, my Lord and my God. There was no need to put his finger in his hand or his fist in Jesus' side. He makes a statement that the church, that Christian theology is built on. My Lord and my God. And the Bible shows that Thomas was a man willing to die for Jesus. Thomas was a guy that would ask for clarifications when he didn't understand. Thomas was a guy who demands an audience with the Lord. By the way, the same thing Job did, and he gets one. Okay? I contrast Thomas with King Amaziah. It says in 1 Kings that he followed the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. If you're not wholeheartedly, isn't that half-heartedly? See, he did the right things, but he wasn't committed to God. There was no surrender. He wasn't really interested in the relationship. And friends, following Jesus, it's a full commitment. I read about a man who was going on a blind date, and so as he goes for the blind date, the woman gets all ready, and she's all pretty, and the ding-dong, and she opens up the door, and there's a guy who obviously wasn't the guy that was described to her. Out of shape, didn't seem to take care of himself, not the one she was anticipating. And so as she stood there a little bit confused, Sylvester steps out from behind him and says, hi, I'm Sylvester. You and I are going out tonight. You see, this is what he did. If she wasn't pretty, he was going to let his buddy take her out. It's kind of funny, but that's sort of what we do with God. We hedge our bets. In case the Lord doesn't pull through, do we have this thing covered? Do you hold back enough money in case God doesn't, We're not going to tithe because obviously we got to pay these bills, and I'd like to help out the church, but I can't do that. Or I'd like to forgive, but what if I forgive and then they take advantage of me and everybody ridicules me? I can't handle that. I think we even pray that way. If it's your will, it's an out clause that maybe God won't pull it off, and therefore we get to keep a relationship. We get to keep him in proper perspective. And for Thomas, my Lord and my God, and he meant it. He went to southern India. Do you realize that the church in southern India is still there today? He started it in 58 AD. He was martyred in 72 AD. Why would he do that? Because Jesus drove him to leave his world and go to a people far, far away and give his life for them. I think the existence of this church lends evidence to the fact that Thomas should not be remembered as the doubter. And let me close up. I'm sure that when Thomas saw the hands with the scars, he was healed of his own emotional scars. I'm sure when he saw his Lord and his Lord stuck out his hand, all his scars were healed by the Lord's scars. One of my favorite stories, I'm closing up with this. This little kid swimming in his pond behind his house, here in Florida, and he gets about a quarter of the way out, sees an alligator enter the water. Turns around, starts swimming and screaming as fast and as loud as he can. And right when he gets to the edge of the water, oh, by the way, his mom hears the screaming, comes running out, sees the alligator coming after him. They race down. They get to the water's edge at the same time. The alligator grabs him. She grabs him. And the tug of war begins. And so they're tugging hard. The alligator's stronger, but she's more determined. And this neighbor hears all the screaming, comes out, shoots the alligator, saves the kid. Kid goes to the hospital. Obviously, he's all ripped up from the alligator. And reporters come and they go, wow, we want to do a story on you. Then we take pictures of your scars. He says, yeah, go ahead, And so they take pictures, and then they're wrapping up. And he says, well, don't you want to see my other scars? I said, what other scars? And he lifts up his shirt where his mom had grabbed a hold of him and dug into his skin with a grip that was never going to let go. And you know what, friends? The Lord, his hands have those same scars because you are the recipient of his grip. And I want you to know that there's nothing you can do to be released from that grip. And when life isn't working out, you can trust that grip. We might not know what he's doing, but he's got you. He's never going to let you go. Work out your doubt. Because we know that he's good. We know that he longs to be gracious to us. You're his daughter and his son. Enjoy him. Gracious God, thank you for Thomas to show us that sometimes we can't be satisfied unless it's your presence. So may we prioritize being in your presence. And when life doesn't make sense, may we trust you. And may we not just sit back and wonder, let's get to work and search it out so that we have the answer that's keeping us from you. Or maybe have an answer for somebody else that's living at a distance from you. I pray that you'd bless everybody here this evening. Anybody who needs a healing touch, release it. Guidance from you, give them clarity. Lord, most of all, be close to us. The greatest thrill in life is to have a relationship